I'm Jay Tahoe, and you're watching Tahoe's Teardown. Welcome to Tahoe's Teardown, everyone. On today's Teardown, we're going to be replacing the brake calipers on this lovely 2011 Jeep Liberty, or for you Jeepers out there, more commonly known as the KK. For this project, you're going to need a couple of things. Right, you're going to need the new calipers along with the hardware that comes with it. You're going to need your manufacturer specified brake fluid. In this case, we use .3. You are going to need a jack and jack stands that support the capacity of your vehicle. You're going to want a torque wrench for when we put the tires back on to torque the lugs. You're going to want a persuader like old Betsy here to help you get the lugs off. A C-clamp can be helpful if you got a stuck caliper. And you're going to want a multi-size ratchet set, as there's going to be a couple of bolts that we're going to have to remove. A funnel is also helpful if we have to add more brake fluid during bleeding. So your brake caliper is what closes the pads on your rotors while you're driving to make your car come to a stop. I've got one in my hand right here. This is the front caliper. We're going to be doing both front calipers today. The front is responsible for about 75% of the braking, so these are going to be a lot beefier than the ones in the rear. You can see here we've got the plug where we're going to plug in our brake hose, and we've got the bleeder screw. This is where we're going to bleed it later. But more on that to come. Now that we've explained what a caliper is, let's get the vehicle jacked up and get the tires off. At the parking brake, because this is not going to affect the front. The parking brake applies the brakes to the rear tires. Some people like to put chocks behind the tires. I definitely think it's a good precaution. I haven't done it here, but do as I say, not as I do. First, we're going to want to get the lugs off, so you can take your lug wrench. Also, if you know the ratchet size, you can use that too. These happen to be 19s. I do have a 19mm ratchet, but we'll use this for dramatic effect. Now, a lot of times these lugs are stuck on real good, and it takes a lot of strength to get them off. And I'm not, a juiced up steroid head, so what I like to use is old Betsy. Old Betsy is my persuader, and as you can see here, she's going to give me a lot more kinetic energy when I pull there. There's going to be a lot more force acting on this lug. So all I got to do is take old Betsy and ooh, that's a satisfying noise. Alright, let's get all the lugs creaked, and we'll jack it up. Alright, so now that all the lugs have been cracked, I could remove them with my hand if I really wanted to, or at least a ratchet. The point is that they're loose. You'll be able to get them off once we have the car off the ground. Now it's time to jack up the vehicle. So I've got my 2¼ ton jack here. What I'm going to do is make sure that I put it in the lock position so I can raise it. This is a hydraulic jack I bought from AutoZone. It's probably about $40 with these two jack stands. This is definitely going to save you a lot of time and effort versus the factory jack that comes with your vehicle. Now, I'm going to put this under the car. You got to find a solid point. You got to make sure you're touching metal, because the last thing you want to do is come up through your floorboards. Now I've got the steering knuckle here, is a good point. I know this is where I jacked it up last time for other repairs. So let's start taking the car up. Don't worry about that noise. That is just the jack. This jack can support up to 2½ tons. Some people like to put a piece of wood between the jack and the part of the car that they're jacking up. It can prevent denting and scuff marks. As you can see, I've got some scuff marks here. In this case, this vehicle is well past 100,000 miles, so doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to get from A to B. Now, alright, Now that I've got the tire well off the ground, it is time for my jack stand. Let's take the jack stand here. I'll collapse it back down. And we can put, well, alright. You can see here, I need that knuckle up just a little bit higher for it to rest on the jack stand. So we're going to give this a couple more pumps. Let's see how we're making out. So the tire's up. Let's see if we can get that. Yep. There we go. That should rest on the jack stand. So what you can do now is slowly release your jack. As you can see, the car is now balanced on the jack stand. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to take the lugs off. So now let's grab our lug wrench and our ratchet. We've already loosened these guys up. Let's take them off. After that, you can pretty much just take them off by hand. Alright, and what I would recommend is put these somewhere safe where you're not going to lose them. I'm going to go ahead and put them in this box here, just so that we don't lose them, because the last thing you want to do is lose a lug nut. Alright, so we've got all the lugs off. Now it is time to take the tire off. So, tire is now off. You could either use the tire as a chair while you work on the brakes, or another thing you can do is use it as a catch, just in case your jack stand were to fail, which it wouldn't. You can also use the tire as a fail-safe. So, now we got the tire off, and you can see your brake system. This here's your rotor. This is what actually stops the vehicle. You can see the pads are in here. This is what closes on the rotor to bring it to a stop the same way it would on a bicycle. And this device right here is what closes the pads onto the rotor. This is known as the caliper. And the way the caliper works, there is a hose that you can see right there that feeds into the caliper. When you pump the pedal inside the car, this is called the master cylinder, and the master cylinder pushes fluid found here. This is brake fluid into those brake lines. They flow through the brake line into that brake hose, and the pressure causes the caliper to close on the rotor here. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to remove the caliper, and to do this, it's pretty simple. We just got a couple of bolts we got to undo. I'm going to go ahead and get those taken off now, and we'll remove the caliper. This particular caliper is mounted on with two 13mm slide pins. It's just two bolts. You stick your ratchet on here. Now sometimes these are a little tough, so you got to use a little extra force when getting it. Let me see if I can put my phone down here, right? There we go. So that loosened it up. And we'll go ahead and remove that bolt there. Once you get it past that point, you're pretty much going to want to do it by hand. What I recommend is that you put these somewhere safe too. It's just this little guy right here. I recommend putting the top back in the top, the bottom back in the bottom. But we'll go ahead and we'll put this somewhere safe. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom bolt here. Go ahead and get that out. Okay. So I'm going to remember that's my top bolt and that's my bottom. Alright, so now once those have been taken off, the caliper will swing freely. You might have to, if it's really stuck on there, you might have to get it with a screwdriver, but you can see with this one is seized up. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to replace it. Now, when you take your caliper off, you'll see it's attached to the brake hose here. One thing you never want to do is let this dangle. You can rest it on the rotor. A good trick is to take a clothes hanger, like a metal coat hanger, and dangle it from the suspension here. Because if you let that dangle, you risk letting that hose rip. And if that rips, you're going to have a very bad time. Now, a couple of things you can notice on the caliper here. This up here under this little cap, I'll just get that off so I can show you. That's known as the bleeder screw. When we go to bleed our system later, this will be important. This allows brake fluid to shoot out. We just don't want to let any air go back in. In most cars, it's a 10 millimeter. I believe on this one, because Jeep likes to be difficult, I believe it's a 13, maybe a 12. And this guy right here is what holds the brake hose onto the caliper. This is known as a banjo bolt, and what this does is it's a little bolt with a little hole inside of it that allows the fluid to pass through into the caliper. So we're going to take that off right now, and you're going to see I'm going to be very quick about not letting the fluid spill out. Alright, now I've gotten my banjo bolt out here. You'll see that it's very, there's some fluid coming out. Now, I would wear latex gloves, guys, because brake fluid is really corrosive. Definitely don't eat anything after touching this. Now, as you can see here, ooh, we're leaking a little bit. A lot of fluids coming out there. That's all coming out of the old caliper here. Now, this guy has a core charge, so we're going to have to bring that back. Now, let's see here. We got a new banjo bolt with the new hardware. Additionally, we've also got a new washer. That's very important to make sure that that washer goes inside and outside of the banjo bolt. Our old washer is actually stuck on this guy, but luckily we've got two new washers here. Very important to replace those washers when we put the new caliper in. Right. Now that we've gotten the caliper off, your brake hose can dangle now because it's not weighed down by the caliper. I would put a little baggie in it to catch any stray brake fluid. Brake fluid is really, really corrosive, so again, I'm making a mess here, but I would put something down to catch it. The next step is going to be to get the rotor bracket off. This one uses two 21 millimeter bolts. This is going to be a little tougher to get off than your caliper was. So for this one, you may need the persuader again. Let's see if I can fit her down here. If not, there's always the hammer method too. By the way, when you disconnect the banjo bolt from the old caliper, have your new caliper ready to go, because you're going to want to connect the banjo bolt right away to minimize loss of brake fluid. Otherwise, you're going to end up putting in more brake fluid. We're going to have to bleed them anyway. You'll notice that in the new caliper, there's this little cap where the banjo bolt came out of on the old one. You're just going to want to pull that out with a pliers. Let's see what we got here to get that out with, because that just prevents stuff from getting in there. That just prevents debris from getting in there, because you don't want debris mixed in with your brake fluid. Not a good thing. And there we go. That's pulled out. Alright, so we're going to put the new caliper on now. Okay, so things got a little messy on the other side, so I moved on to this side to actually show you a best practice that'll work a lot better. As you can see, I unmounted the whole rotor bracket first this time, which just uses these two 21 millimeter bolts that go through here. I unmounted the bracket with the caliper. Reason for that being is that our new setup comes with a new rotor bracket too, so And as you can see, the rotor is not held on by much here, and I've balanced the caliper between the knuckle and the backing plate here. Again, you just don't want to let this caliper dangle because you don't want to put stress on that hose. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually mount the caliper before I take off the banjo bolt, so I can just quickly swap it onto the new one. So I'm going to put that in now, and then I will come back in a minute. What I've done here, the rotor was straying all over the place, so I just took a lug nut and put it on here to keep the rotor in place. Then I mounted the new rotor bracket along with the caliper on it. Now I'm just replacing these two 22mm bolts here. This is going to hold the caliper assembly into place. So once I have that off, then we're going to take out the banjo bolt and we're going to put it into the new caliper. So I'll see you guys in a few minutes. Now that that's done, we've got our new assembly mounted. We're now going to take the banjo bolt out of the old caliper. Now note, when you do this, brake fluid is going to start spraying everywhere, so you want to put it in that new hole as fast as you can. Just get that done, because boy, that brake fluid is going to come out. The new banjo bolt goes right here. Now you've got your set of new hardware. Remember that the banjo bolt, you want one washer on each side of this little guy here. You want one washer there and one on the surface of the caliper, just to make it airtight. You don't want any brake fluid spilling out while you're driving. That is bad news. Alright, that's not something you can really do with one hand, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll see you guys back in a minute. So, the banjo bolt is on to the new caliper. As you can see, it's all in one piece here. We did not lose that much brake fluid in the process, so that's good. Now what we're going to have to do is replace the pads. So take your 13mm, and what we're going to have to do is go ahead and just swing the caliper out. Now, there we go. So you're going to take your 13mm, and you're just going to tweak this guy. Alright, now sometimes these slide pins don't want to come out, and sometimes the inner part starts twirling with it, so sometimes you got to hold them with pliers. Doing that, I'm going to loosen it up. Now I'm going to take out the slide pin. Alright, that is out. So now, you'll notice your caliper just swings open, which will allow you room to put the pads in. Now, also, it's worth noting that your new set is going to come with new hardware here, new little shims to keep the pads in place. Those go right here. So I'm going to put those back in, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the pads back in. Okay, so now the shims are in there. We can slide this open, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to replace the pads. With the pads, all you really got to do is slide them into that little crevice there. Again, it might be hard to show you with the with one hand. Well, let me see if I can hold it like this and get it. We're gonna put the these little bumps here are gonna go into the little crevice here. And again, do not try to not get brake fluid on the pads. I'm going to wipe these off. I'm going to put them in, and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, well, after that, our pads are back on. And now, it is time to bleed this thing. And the reason for this is because we took the caliper off. We let air into the brake lines. And air in the brake lines is very, very bad. This needs to be an airtight system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the level in my master cylinder here, and as you can see, it's a little low because we had some brake fluid drip out. So I'm going to take my my manufacturer specified brake fluid. When you're at your auto parts store, always ask what kind of brake fluid your vehicle uses. Putting in the wrong kind of brake fluid is not a good thing. They all have different boiling points and can handle different heats, and you don't want brake fluid to boil. Let me just get something to puncture this little guy here. Now, you're going to need an assistant to bleed your brakes, or they also do make one-man bleeder kits. You can also make one easy enough out of a Coke can, or any kind of liquid for that matter. I'm just going to top up my fluid here. This will force any air towards the back of the lines. So I just want to wait until I get to the max level here. Alright. We're at the max line. I overfill it a little bit too because we're going to lose some when we bleed. Now, when you bleed, you always want to start from the furthest to the master cylinder, which would be the passenger side rear, then the driver's side rear, then the passenger side front, and then the driver's side. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to let a little air out. Now, I believe that my bleeder screw is a 13 millimeter. This little guy right here, the one above the banjo bolt that holds the caliper on, this is the bleeder screw. This is what we're going to use to bleed this system out. So before we bleed, I just want to make a point here. If you were to drive right now, it would not be a good situation because this pedal is going to go straight to the floor. And that's because there is a lot of air in these lines right now. We got to bleed this thing. So, let's go ahead and do that. Just to recap, we've got both of our old calipers off. We've got the new calipers on. We've got our pads, we've got our rotors back on. Our brakes are set up. We just need to bleed out the lines now so there's no air and we can drive. So, it looks like this is a 10 millimeter on the new caliper. It's a really different size than what we had before. Now, I'm starting here on the one we just did. All I'm going to do before I bleed is I'm going to open this up, right? And I'm going to wait until I see some fluid start to come out. That's going to force any air that's in that brake line out. So we're just going to wait a minute. Remember, we got gravity working here, so we got to wait till it goes down the line and then back up here. But we should see that start to drip in a minute now. Once it starts to drip, I'm going to go ahead and close it back up. Any minute now, we should see that start to drip. And it might be a minute or two if you lost a lot of brake fluid, because it's got to go through the entire line. If you let a lot of air in there, you gotta let it out. Alright, so this is starting to drip, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this back up. Let me just get my ratchet. Ooh, dropped my ratchet. I'll get my ratchet here and I'm going to go ahead and close that back up. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I'll grab an assistant and we're going to bleed these lines. So at this point, you're going to bleed the brakes from the passenger side rear, driver's side rear, passenger side front, driver's side front. Now what you're going to do, you got to have two people for this. You're going to crawl under the car and find the bleeder screw on the rear caliper, which is right here. Now what you're going to do is have the person inside the car, they're going to pump the brake pedal 3 times. On the third pump, they're going to hold the pedal down. I would open up a communication, just say, hey, you know, on the third pump, you're going to yell holding. Then you open it, yell open, and once you close it again, brake fluid's going to come shooting out once you open it. Once you close it, they can then release the pedal. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bleed from we're going to bleed all 4. We bled all 4, furthest to closest to master cylinder. We tried not to make too much of a mess. Now what you want to do before you put your tires back on is test your brake pedal. Make sure it doesn't go all the way to the floor. Testing it, and we are good. Get some nice resistance there. So now it's time to go ahead and put the tires back on. Go ahead and Get my tire back on. I'm going to put the lugs on before putting it back on the ground. And once we put it back on the ground, we'll use the torque wrench. And we should be squared away. Okay guys, so I took it around the block a few times and did a couple of short stops just to make sure that it was functioning properly. So now it is time to torque the lugs. So we've got our torque wrench here. What you want to do is right on the bottom here, you'll see you can set it and release this little pin right here. And these guys go at about 85 foot-pounds. So you're going to set the torque wrench to 85 foot-pounds. You're going to twirl it around until it gets to 85. And then what you're going to do, give me 1 second, I'm just going to get it where it needs to be. Bring them up to 85. There we go. Now once you've set that, you lock that back, lock that pin there. Now you're going to go around to each lug. Do this in a star pattern too. Once the wrench clicks like that, you'll know it's torqued to spec. Get 2 clicks just so you're satisfied. And again, do it in a star pattern. Do all 5. Okay. And you're going to rinse and repeat with all 4 tires. And that's it, guys. You have successfully replaced the brake calipers. The principle is the same concept with pretty much any modern vehicle. And thanks for watching Tahoe's Teardown.